So first of all, last year we presented exactly in the same spot the same research. And so I just give you the main outcomes of the research of last year. And the outcomes was that there is a difference between US and specifically Silicon Valley and Europe. And the main reason is that US companies are more acquisitive than European companies by large. That is the wrap-up of last year's report. This year we decided to do this research again. We extended it a bit, and we questioned what has changed since last year. Here we go. So first of all, we dig a bit deeper, and so together with CrunchBase, we decided to analyze 33,000 M&A transactions since 2010, so in the last 7 years. And we cleaned up all the database by all the transactions did not involve a startup company. And so we went down to 15,000 transactions. And so this is the statistical base of the data that we are presenting. Headlights. First of all, if you look at who is buying startups across the globe, you can see there are 2 regions that are a bit ahead compared to the others, and are the US and Europe. Don't be fooled by the bars, because we cut the US bar by a certain amount. And then if you look at the rest of the world, we are mostly talking about Pacific and Asia. The other regions are currently not that statistically relevant. Headlines number 1. Number 2, there is a strong, solid growth pattern. Startup M&A are growing year over year. And it looks to be an inflection point around 2014. 2014, 2015, 2016, we have experienced a large acceleration of acquisition of startups. Pretty huge. The other information still to be analyzed, because again, that about the value of transaction has been in a certain way not properly pure, because we are talking about data that sometimes are not disclosed. So we are just covering probably 70–80% of the transactions on monitor. But you can see that in the last year, the growth was in terms of number of transactions, but has not been mirrored by in terms of the value of the transaction. Number 3, Europe is late, but is catching up. If you see the percentage of Europe in terms of the overall M&A, you see that in terms of number of acquisition, they move from approximately 20% to 23%. In terms of value, they move from 20% to slightly above 30%. So the big gap that we experienced last year is still there, but is slowly reducing, meaning that Europe, something is happening and something is positive. Other piece of information to be shared. Talking about who's buying what, it looks like there are 2 areas that are working a lot together. And these 2 areas are, guess what? US and Europe. These 2 ecosystems seem to have a lot of preference between each other. You see that 83% of the transactions involve US or European entities. Other information, yes, US and Europe lead the pack, but they are not equal. If you look at the numbers, we are talking about of the 15,000 M&A transactions we are discussing about, 10,000 of them refers to US companies. And if you look at the bar below, you see that Silicon Valley alone, that is this 100-kilometer land strip we are here in, are almost the same number than Europe. Other information is, if you look at the average transaction price, you see that typically US companies, US startups are being sold at approximately as a median of an average of 100 million. If you look at European startups, the average amount is 46 million, less than half, meaning that US startups are more expensive, or probably European startups are sold a bit cheaper, or probably are not good enough. Another interesting analysis, and just giving you the headlights, is if you look at who's buying startups, or on the other side, where startups are that have been acquired, or there is a sort of balance between the companies that are buying startups and the startup being sold, we see that not all the regions show a sort of M&A balance, meaning that there are certain regions where the number of startups being acquired is the same that the number of the startups that the local company are buying. While there are other regions where the number of startups have been sold is larger than the number of startups have been acquired. So if you look at who is what, you see that typically in the US, you have a sort of perfect balance. There is the same number of startups acquired, the same number of companies acquiring startups. If you look at Europe, you see that the startups being sold is larger than the number of startups have been acquired by European companies. And then if you go to emerging countries, you see that this unbalance is even larger, meaning that there is a lot of young ecosystems that are producing startups, but the local companies are not buying startups at the same rate. There is only an exception out of this data, that is the Pacific, specifically China and India, when we see that the number of companies that are acquiring startups is larger than the number of startups that have been acquired. So this region looks like that are net acquirers of startups, while Europe is still a net sellers of startups. And in US, we have a sort of balance. Who is buying what? Who are the top 30 acquirers in the world, or the top 50 acquirers? We can say the top 50 acquirers are all US companies, and 9 of them are from Silicon Valley. Surprise. And if you want to see the numbers, you see this is the full ranking. You can find the report. This is just a few of European, a few of Korean, Samsung, and a few of Japanese acquirers. But it's mostly a US-dominated game, and mostly a Silicon Valley-dominated game. Europe. Obviously, Europe numbers are smaller, but there are 2 Europe. One is UK, and one is the rest of Europe. So you see numbers are not exactly equal. UK plays the same role that US are playing at a global level. There is a big gap. And so if you're looking at the Brexit effect with a bit of worry, you are totally right, because that is a big piece of Europe, a big piece of the startup economies is across the channel. And then this is the list of the cities that are most dominated. Finally, we are also able, since we have crunched a lot of 1,000 transactions, to provide some statistical analysis. This is good because sometimes you ask you, okay, what is the right time to sell startups? I don't know which is the right time to sell startups. Typically, the answer is when someone wants to buy you with a good price. But if you're looking statistically, what is the profile of a startup that's made all the way to the exit, that's you go. Typically, is 8 years old, approximately 10 to 50 employees. This company has raised 127 million as an average, and this company is typically being sold at 70 million. You can see all the distribution around. That 170 million raised, 70 million sold, what tell you? That, based on our statistic, 71% of the startups that have been acquired do not return the capital that have been invested. Just 51% return half, or less than half, that the capital has been invested. It's what we technically call the fire sales. Just 16% return, or a decent multiple, between 1 and 3. That is the minimum that you typically expect when you're investing into something as a fund. And there is just a small percent that is able to produce relevant return or relevant multiples. So substantially, what we have done is to statistically demonstrate the power law. That's something that a lot of people are talking about. So meaning that when you are in the startup business, you are investing a lot, but at the end will be 1 or 2 that will make you rich. And sometimes you're not picking up the right card. So this is just in quick tour what we have found it out. We can take a look at the report for more details, and now I would like to spend some time with our panelists to go a bit more, provide you more insights about what we have done. So we have the opportunity to have 2 persons from Orrick, but they're living on the 2 sides of the pond, and that's make the possibility to comment this data a bit more interesting. So let's start from who's local, that is Matteo. And Matteo, what's your takeaways out of this research, and what you see looking at the M&A market? What is your perspective from Silicon Valley?
Yes, so I think the data is very good, and I think it's consistent with what we see in the marketplace. But I think the data also only tells one side of the story, which is the side about the exits. What we're also seeing is a lot of more activity that goes beyond the exit at this time. And basically the activity we see is in 4 different channels, not necessarily ending in M&A, or at least M&A focused. Traditionally, of course, we see companies, startups, scale-ups coming from Europe here, looking for capital and exit opportunities. But in parallel to that, there is a growing number also of companies based here in Silicon Valley that are going into Europe for many times just to open up research centers or leverage the European engineering talent. So that's really not captured in the M&A statistics, but it's a significant economic force that's moving capital really from Silicon Valley into European countries. Also, outside of the world of startups, we see larger European companies coming here and establishing innovation centers to scout new technologies. And in reflection, US companies, Silicon Valley companies going into Europe to source technologies, not maybe necessarily by M&A, but by licensing or by early asset deals, asset acquisitions. So this is a great report, but there is a lot more that's going on. And the challenge is to maybe try to measure some of these other segments of economic activity.
Perfect. Olivier, from France and Europe, what's your takeaways?
Well, I think, I've been in this, in the legal business for quite a while, and US companies buying European companies is history. I mean, it started after the Second World War, so it's nothing new. I would say the converse would be something new. And coming to that, I mean, I just read in a magazine some days ago that a company that I had as a client for its first round, and it was funded by a local, a fund from here, Vision Capital. Vision Capital was founded by Scandinavians, and the idea was basically to build a bridge. Probably they didn't mine the bridge well enough, but it was to build a bridge between Europe and here. And this company was also probably too early because it was data storage. And it didn't go well. The company was sold to a US company. And well, that's the bad news. But the good news is that this company has been taken over by a French company just a few days ago. And in a way, this is what we're trying to, what we see in this report. I mean, it goes back and forth, and Europe is catching up. Now, based on that, and as I told you, one of my first contacts here was Vision Capital, and they had this idea. I'm not brighter than anyone, but my idea has always been to try to do something to build that bridge. And this is what we are doing today with Orrick, as we're launching today our Silicon Valley Europe desk that will be here to help Americans to better understand the way we handle deals and financing, I mean, not only M&A, but financing in Europe, and also help Europeans to do the same around here to get a better understanding and better relation with the local actors here.
So this is another pillar in this virtual bridge that we are working since a while. So welcome. So again, you're already here since, but that is pretty interesting news and announcement. Genè, what's your, again, you are behind this with us, so, but you definitely have more analytical analysis that we have. So what is...
So I'm Genè, and I deal a lot with our data on CrunchBase, and I just want to thank Mind the Bridge for using the CrunchBase data set, because even though we supplied it, they did all the heavy lifting to really look at it and do the analysis. So a great report, thank you. I think what was interesting for me is that deal volume was up everywhere. So if you looked at the US, deal volume was up 30% year over year, and when we did the year, we did it July to June, so it was sort of mid-year, but it's up in the last year, which was interesting to me. Europe even more so, I think it was 60% relative to what Europe was a year ago. and the rest of the world was also up, not quite as significantly. When you look at the deal amounts, in the US there was a contraction of about 9%. Obviously not every deal has reported announced, but Europe, interestingly enough, was also up 50%. So I think what the story is that Europe, we definitely see this on the funding data side, and we're also seeing it on the exit side, that Europe is rising and growing, and I anticipate to see that to continue. I think the other interesting stat that I got from the report, that about a third of European startups, 36%, are acquired by US-based companies. And I think what this demonstrates is obviously the huge synergies in interaction between Europe and the US startup ecosystem. And I think it's going to be interesting to track that number over time. In a way, you say that's nothing new, but it's going to be interesting to see how that shifts over time, and also the corollary, Europe buying from the US. And I know in both markets, I think in the US market, you're largely buying from US companies. It was about 87%. In Europe, it was about 75%. Were bought by companies locally, and then about 25% outside of Europe. So I think some interesting trends, and congrats, this is the second report, so I think there's more to come.
Perfect, yes, just mention what you just said, and what Matteo before said. Yes, it looks like that Europe is catching up. It looks like that obviously US is playing the biggest part in all of this, and also in Europe they have a relevant share of all the acquisition, but as you say, the number or the percentage of acquisition is slightly going down, meaning there is more internal activity Europe into Europe. And on the other hand is the fact that we have more and more European corporate that are setting up a presence over here, and this is what we will discuss right after the break, is a signal that Europe is going probably to play back a more active role, not just a passive role, more active role. And that's what we are seeing, and that's what we'll be more discussing in a panel after the break. So I would like to thank you for your contribution, for your support. Again, thanking Orrick for making this possible, thanking CrunchBase because the data are amazing, and so we are blessed to be able to do the opportunity to dig into that. And the announcement is that we have a coffee break that is open, and the bad news is you have just 10 minutes, and you have to back. But we will discuss about a lot of cool things. The first of them will be artificial intelligence. So be intelligent enough to be back on time. Bye.